Welcome to Leading Large. I'm Anna Roussos, and this podcast is designed to empower you with the skills and mindset necessary to excel your career within the construction, property, engineering, and architecture sectors. Whether you're embarking on a professional journey or seeking guidance, tune in every fortnight as myself and industry leaders will share practical strategies, tips, and insights to help you gain clarity and propel your career forward with purpose. Leading Large is your regular dose of inspiration and a guide to assist you in unlocking your full potential. I'm thrilled to have you on this journey. This is Leading Large with Anna Roussos. Today's Leading Large guest is Adrian Esplin, a strategic and inspirational leader with a career that spans more than 30 years in commercial construction and development. As the Sarah Construction's CEO, Adrian is passionate about leading and developing our people, creating safe workplaces and driving continuous improvement. Adrian is privileged to lead an exceptional team of industry professionals. He focuses on drive and performance, creating an environment where everyone can excel and feel a part of something greater. As a true leader, Adrian empowers his team to achieve outstanding results for their long-term customers. Welcome, Adrian Esplin. Adrian, thank you so much for joining us on Leading Large. I've known you for many, many years.
Yes.
And I've loved seeing how your career has flourished over the last 10 to 15 years. But today, I get to find out how it all started. So I want to take you right back to when you were finishing high school.
Yep.
And what made you consider going into construction. But I also know that you did a different degree to what a lot of our graduates are traditionally doing who are working in the commercial space, which is construction management economics. And you started in the world of engineering.
Correct, yes.
So talk us through. Tell me everything.
Where it started and why.
Yeah.
No, it was interesting, Anna, because back in the day, and this is going, God, a long way back now. Judging, as you can see by my vest, it's cold. That's why I've got my old man's vest on. I don't feel that old, but I've got to acknowledge that the years keep ticking over. So in the late 80s, going into university, there wasn't a lot of choice. Certainly the choices that there are now. Yeah. I always enjoyed anything to do with building structures, etc. Was reasonable at maths and science, so I thought civil engineering would be a good step.
So it was a different offering back then. So was mum or dad or family in the world of construction?
No. Well, so both of my parents were born in Europe, and both of my grandparents had worked in construction. Yeah. So both grandfathers on the Italian side was a builder, cabinet maker, and on the Irish side, my grandfather, after serving in the Navy in World War II, came out and was a builder's labourer and then a concreter before he went into some other pastimes. So you could say it was probably in the lines somewhere. My father was a mechanical engineer, so that was probably
a little bit of engineering.
Yeah, a little bit of the engineering. But it was that, and back then there were only 4 forms of engineering, and so I went for civil because I really liked the structures part. And so for me, I actually graduated as a structural engineer, and as I was studying and going right back to late 80s, early 90s, there was no work in Australia, let alone South Australia.
Yeah, no, so, it's amazing because I share a similar story where my parents are also from Europe. Yeah. And, Polish. And I think back then, my dad is a residential builder. He still has his building license, even
Fantastic.
Though I don't think he's actually built a house in Australia, but he keeps renewing his building license.
Because he might one day.
He might, but he's very quick to let everyone know that he's the best builder ever.
He probably is very good coming from good European
I know.
background.
Well, the thing is, it is good. And, we look at it now and we'll talk about this a little bit later on about talent shortage, but through high school, they needed to learn how to do painting, so he can tile, he can lay bricks, he knows carpentry. Yeah. And it was quite natural for him to sort of fall into that building space, which is, I think, part of the reason why I love recruiting in construction. But he was a residential builder, so they migrated from Poland, and then he did some building in New Zealand. Yeah. And then after 4 or 5 years, we actually came to Australia. So then I was born in 82. So it would have been about late 80s when we came to Adelaide. And the building market was dead. And
There
so
was
he
nothing.
had to retrain into panel beating, which was completely, completely different. So he's still renovated, like he's still been, he's going to hate me for saying this. He's been renovating our family home for 30 plus years, driving my mother insane because no one else can do it because he's the builder.
He's the builder and he's got the expertise.
But I felt for him because, you know, at that time, English was a second language still, couldn't do what he knew he felt that he could do well and had to retrain. So I guess for you, you finished university and the market was horrible.
Was horrible. And so I'd been working in the last 2 years while I was studying with a structural engineering firm that was bought out by GHD. And it was interesting, the market then, you know, it was early 90s, was just starting to sort of show, you know, economists talk about green shoots. I don't know if you could say that about the construction industry at the time, but it was just starting to sort of move. And it was interesting during the time that I was working as a, you know, as like a trainee structural engineer, I found working as an engineering designer quite constrictive. So you're always dealing within codes, limit states, etc.
Yeah.
And I always enjoyed going to site and dealing with the problem solving that was there, because you don't always, when you're on sites, you don't always have all the equipment and tools and skills at hand. So you've got to try and bring that together and on the spot when there's time pressure, cost pressure, and get a solution. And so an opportunity came up to flip and move into the construction industry, which it was with Balderstone, that's Balderstone Hornibrook, which is now sort of Lend-Lease. So I took that opportunity with two hands and never looked back. Yeah. And I've loved it ever since.
I remember when we caught up for coffee a few months ago, and correct me if I was wrong, but I think at that time when you joined Balderstone Hornibrook, it wasn't in a full-time capacity.
Oh, no, it was.
It was?
It
wasn't a full-time capacity.
It wasn't a full-time capacity. Right. So in the work that I was doing with a company called Fletcher Scott Fairfield, which became CMP S&F, which was then later bought out by GHD as things evolved, that was in a part-time.
That was on a part-time.
That was on a part-time
So
capacity.
when you joined Baldies,
yeah, the old Baldies.
I remember them they had the great puffer black jackets with the green logo and everyone wanted to work for Balderstone back in the day.
Yeah.
What was your role like? So for that first 5 years, so I guess you're coming in, although you had done some engineering across design and had a strong understanding of structures, what did you actually have to do for the first 5 years of your career?
Great question, Hannah. I was first employed as a site engineer.
Yeah.
So that was always about, and I was employed at the time, so when I started with Balderstone, government, or DIT as they're known now, was SACON, South Australian Construction. And they've undergone sort of 5 or 6 transformations. But there was a really strong focus on quality. You had site superintendents from government. So primarily my role was to get in, and it was a lot of technical issue resolution. So on more complex government jobs, being the person on the ground to be the conduit between managing quality, particularly with structures, and then later into
sort of
finishes.
Supporting more, I guess, on the like a site management side.
Correct. Yeah, supporting the site management team between them, the government, and also the consultants, the designers, and working through and trying to preempt and predict where issues would come up, making sure people are working off all the right set of documentation, etc. Because of course, and this goes back to my old school vest, but back in the time, and I used to hate people talking about the old days, but it's,
I do that a lot now too.
I know, it's shocking. It's like, whoa, back in the day.
Yeah.
But there was no Aconex, there was no electronic transfer of information. Everything was done by hand. So if I needed to give people information, I had to organise to either copy it myself or get someone to copy it, issue it out to the trades. So consequently, there was a strong bond and relationship between the role I was doing and the trades, because you were the conduit of information and the designers. RFIs, that you hear are the bane of the industry. In that time, you had to draw everything by hand, stick it through a fax machine so that it would get to the engineers and architects and then back again. But consequently, that process, because it was so hard sending information compared to what it is now, you made sure that only the right people got what they needed.
Yeah, that's great. So how long were you in that role? So site engineering, did you, as coming through, were you exposed within Balderstone as in estimating at all? Or like how long did you then move? Did you ever, were you ever a contract administrator? Or?
No, so it's a really good question. So they had sort of 2 pathways at the time. One was on the financial side, so coming in as, in effect, a graduate. Yeah. And everyone typically started as a site engineer, depending on which way you wanted to go. where your natural sort of skills lied. You either went into contract administration or you followed through more on the site management path. So for me, I worked there for 6.5 years, which was fantastic, brilliant foundation.
Yeah.
And in that time, worked through the position of site engineer into what it is, project engineer. The next step was site manager. And
Okay.
yeah, so I actually went into the path. So I then had an opportunity to join Multiplex when they came back to the state.
Yeah.
That opportunity partly arose because the person running Balderstone who first employed me went to work in Indonesia and then came back to Australia working for Multiplex. So that was a good connection. And I started with them as a site manager.
As a site manager.
Yeah.
I didn't know any of this. I'm actually getting really excited now. So I want to go back a little bit, and we might have to circle a few times because, we're working in an environment at the moment, there's such a significant talent shortage.
Yes.
Whether it's across, white technical, but site management.
Yeah.
And 90% of the site managers that I interview will come from a carpentry background.
Yes.
And we are seeing that, in that tier 1 space, and, I guess Lend-Lease is still doing it. I'm assuming, I see it a little bit in some of the other tier 1s, but I won't mention it just in case. But they are steering people from a degree through to that site management path.
Yep, it's possible. We do the same.
And you do the same at Sarah Constructions. It's interesting that was actually happening
a long time.
many years ago. So this is not something that's new.
No,
because
it's not
of the
something
talent
that's
shortage.
new. So the opportunity was always there. It just depended upon whether that was something that you chose to do. To go into that role to being sort of tertiary trained and moving into site management is much less common than coming from a trade background for obvious reasons. And so, Multiplex, when in my time there, had that as a pathway. We do it, Sarah, Balderstones at the time had it as a pathway. But it was, you would have to, and again, this is the point about taking control of your career or waiting for others to control it on your behalf.
Yeah.
I'm a big believer in you've got to take control of your career and you've got to, ownership starts with the individual. And so I saw that as a potential. I really enjoyed that. And that's probably partly because of my background. I enjoyed the cut and thrust of site, managing issues, outcomes, getting productivity, learning the skills of managing others to get outcomes rather than it always being about yourself. And so that led a pathway into site management.
So you went into site management. Did you, before moving into your leadership roles, did you then go down the project management path? Did you transfer across ever?
I then yes. So I joined Multiplex as a site manager.
Yeah.
Worked in that position for about 3.5 years before, and then moved across into a project manager role.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how important, because I think people come out and I think some of the graduates, they straight away sort of feel that they finish their degree and they think that they're doing it purely because they want to be a project manager.
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to also do is be able to demonstrate there's so many different paths that you can take and still be as successful. Just, I don't see being a project manager as one of the most successful. You could be a great estimating manager. So it's great to see that a graduate should not be afraid to consider, if they're perhaps working with one of the larger firms or like a Sarah Constructions, to go down that site management path with knowing that they can still lead them to project management. How did they then, because if you go back in the old days, I would always see a contract administrator, and we still have businesses now that you'd see, they would come out, they'd be a cadet, they'll go into a junior CA or a CA role, really get across, the financials, be involved with the programming, procuring of trades. And the ones that were elevated to project management had really strong people management skills or stakeholder management skills. So if we were going down the site management path, how would they then get exposed as a project manager? Because you still need, I think as a PM, you still need to be across all that.
You do. And again, it depends on your skill set, your willingness to learn, and the business that you're with and whether that can be provided.
Yeah.
So for me, I worked under a structure at Multiplex where there wasn't a project manager, it was a senior project manager, almost a construction manager, who had various responsibilities. And so there was actually an opening for me to learn more. Nobody said, "Oh, Adrian, that's what you've got to do."
Yeah.
I just saw a gap and thought, "Oh, well, this will be interesting." In seeing that, you then need to build the team underneath you.
Yeah.
So again, this is where you've got to think and go, well, where do I want to go and how can I create the pathway for myself in alignment with the organisation?
Yeah.
So I had some very good site supervisors who were able to step up and take on more. And it was kind of by necessity to get the job done. And so I was able to work with the contract administrator on site. And potentially because of my background, I was able to pick up the elements without needing to be a CA as such and sit down and process claims, understand what that means, understand what to look for, project reporting. And I must admit, in the Balderstone days, they had some good training programs. So even working as a project engineer, you were exposed to letting trades, financial reporting, etc., without necessarily having to do it. So it's really that my advice to people is see the opportunity, lean into it. Don't forget that you're still responsible for the business that you're in, and particularly the project and who you're working with to get an outcome. So if you're going to lean in, how can you bring people with you? And then just, if you need to, put your hand up and say, look, I need some help with this, or I want further learning and understanding. Business will provide that support. If it doesn't, then you're in the wrong business.
Wrong business.
Yeah, that's probably what I'd say.
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. Well, you always, because, you know, and we'll go into a little bit around, you know, you've done so well in your career, and I think, you know, there'd be a lot of people looking at your profile going, oh, wow, I wish I could be like Adrian. I know. Which is Adrian's getting a big head right now.
No. It's funny you say, because I'm just Adrian, you know, and I deal with.
You just do you.
And I deal with all the, you know, the challenges that everybody else faces with. So I don't see myself as anything. But then
someone must have seen something in you. You know, you've progressed.
Yeah.
You know, if you look back in your first, let's say, 10 years, and so that time you wouldn't have been Boulders, you would have moved into multis and sort of been that project management role.
Yeah.
What was setting you apart from the others? Because not everyone that you've worked with is now a CEO of a construction company. Yeah. There must have been fundamentals that you were doing day to day that set yourself apart.
Yeah. Yeah, really.
Or was the European driving you?
As technically a first generation Australian, I think, certainly that goes some way. Yeah. I mean, as in great work ethic, leading by example, having strong drive. I think I have a real strong positive energy, and I like to see others succeed. It's probably less about myself and more about others. I say in my role now, because people look at it and say, oh, wow, CEO, you're the top of the tree. And I say, no, you're actually, look, you've got to think about it in reverse. The majority of my day is empowering everybody to succeed. A big part of my life is all about having the vision, strategy, and then putting plans in place for the organisation to achieve that. But along the way, a lot of it has been about, you know, taking people on the journey with you and making sure that as a group,
understand the why.
Yeah, understand the why, and that you can and that you can succeed. So without realising at the time, that was probably what people saw in me. Plus, it's also the opportunity, and it's thinking about, you know, the businesses that I've been involved in. So on construction, you know, in 30 years, I'm in the third organisation, so I haven't needed to swap and change. The opportunities were there to swap and change, but it's about reading a long-term play based on where you want to take your career.
Yeah.
There were some rocky times at Multiplex. I was within 4 days of going to Europe, and my wife's European as well. So she was looking forward to spending time, being close to all of her family that are in Holland. And that was pulled at the 11th hour. And I was faced with some other good opportunities about that. People heard that had happened in the market. So I could have easily gone, no, this is ridiculous. I'm voting with my feet. I'm going to get out and do something different or work with somebody different. But I invested heavily in the business at that point in time. I could still see future opportunity, and that paid off because I then worked hard, ground out a position here in Adelaide to the point where I was then elevated to be one of a select group of regional directors nationally.
Yeah.
Which was, again, to be put in that environment was just a fantastic learning opportunity. And I never had anybody at that point say, this is what it means to be a regional director. If anything, it was the opposite. Yeah. You know, it was a complete vacuum. And so you've then got to sit back and go, well, what do I want to make of this?
Yeah. And I guess you're very solution orientated, just generally. So do you think then, so I'm guessing though, when you're going through, you must have been inquisitive.
Yeah.
You probably wanted to take on more responsibility. You know, what sort of commitment and attributes did you display during your career?
Yeah, look, really good question, Hannah. I think there was a lot of discipline, dedication and will to succeed, but not at the cost of others.
Yeah.
And so if I look back, and it's interesting now looking at staff profiles, and in the position that I'm in now, you can see people that have the makings of what it takes to have really successful careers. That doesn't mean everybody needs to be a CEO or a general manager or a construction manager. But if you want to achieve in those positions, you need to have certain attributes.
I'm definitely seeing from, some of the other podcasts that we've done from the leaders, there is a level, everyone's very humble and everyone's very invested in the company and in the people. And they've just naturally progressed because they seem to put everyone else first, company first, team first, clients first, and then their leaders have acknowledged that sort of commitment, and then they've allowed them to progress through.
Look, I think that's a big part of it. But at the end of the day, results still need to be achieved. So
we've got to run profitable businesses.
It's really interesting because you can have the best values, but if you don't have a profitable business or you're not achieving outcomes, then you don't have anything that's viable. So I often say to our staff now and our project managers in particular, amongst when I'm addressing the whole group, is you've actually got to think of your project team as your business. So how do you make sure that that's viable in day-to-day cash flow, that it's more positive than negative, that you're making a profit, but not at the cost of your team? Because guess what? If you're going to brutalise them, they're going to say bye-bye and non-performance for your customers, because they're going to say, well, we don't want to use you again. So we're very good at complicating things in life and in whether it's construction, design, whether it's legal, property or whatever else. The basic principles are relatively straightforward. Be a good person, look after people, but hold people to account, but set clear objectives around how you want people to achieve.
So we have a lot of graduates coming out, and I do look back. I keep going back in the day, and I think the degrees changed a little bit because when I started my recruitment career in my 20s, they had to major in quantity surveying. And now there's an ability.
Oh, this was the building and economics degree.
And they all did, So and I thought it was quite good because I felt that we had more estimators coming out, and a lot more people who also wanted to be in that contracts admin path. I would say nearly every person who's recently I've interviewed who's got, let's say, just graduated or 12 months experience, and I say to them, well, what does that plan look like? Why have you done the degree? And they want to be project managers. I also know, and I won't quote this exact statistics, I don't know it fully, but I do know that only 20 to 30% of those people will become project managers. A good portion of them won't. And I don't want them to think that they've failed, by not becoming a PM, because there's so many great opportunities across our industries. But you spoke, Adrian, around you need to understand your strengths.
Yes.
And I also, agree to that. I think if you play to your strengths, overall, you're going to be happier and a lot more confident and feeling a lot more fulfilled in your role. How does a young graduate or someone young in their career go, well, how do I think about what my strengths are, and then work out where they should what avenue they should perhaps go into in the world of construction?
It's a really good question, and I didn't fully address it when you asked it before around what are the different opportunities. And this view of you're only a success in our industry, if you make it into project management, is completely false. If you look at the end of the day, whether you're talking large projects, smaller projects, there needs to be a person who's ultimately accountable, which is ultimately the project manager in most organisations. However, contracts administrator, contracts admin, really, really vital. Design management, even more so. The majority of work that we do, over 80% now, is all design and construct, or D&C. The risk transfer comes earlier to the contractor, so that's really, really important. Not to mention the criticality of site management. So if you look at those, just for a moment, those four key roles on delivery side, we will have site managers working with project managers that are potentially getting paid more than the project manager. Same with contracts administrators. So even though the project manager might be the ultimate leader, it depends on skill set, capability, experience, and what they bring. And so then when you look at office sort of support roles, new business is vitally important, which is all about how we procure work, set it up, transfer it to the project team. So touched on estimating, hugely important, and it can be a really, really good role to work yourself into, particularly once you've had a little bit of site experience. If maybe you don't enjoy the cut and thrust and the pressure of an on-site environment, because it can be quite exhausting. Being an estimator, you get that too, but it potentially ebbs and flows a little bit more.
I think the beauty also about being an estimator, especially in a D&C environment, you've got the ability to work right at the front end, closely with the client, providing value management. I know that, you know, my husband also did a lot of estimating really early on in his career, and that allowed him to work really closely with upper management, and also to understand the strategy of how they're going to actually, you know, procure the work. So I see there's
which is really
lots
important.
of pluses.
Oh, there is, absolutely. And so let alone, estimating, let alone the driving QHSE and the environment, sustainability that's going to come up and through. So it's really interesting is that when you start in any industry, you may not know where your passion lies. Passion can be driven by what you're really interested in and what drives you, or what you're really good at. And the more you do it and the better you become passionate because you realise that it's a skill set that kind of sets you apart. And so for me, it took me probably a good 3 to 5 years to really get a good understanding of the industry and what it is, which direction I wanted to take my career. I think if I look back, I always had a good inkling and knew, but I wanted to test that. I remember being 3 years in and thinking, gee, have I made the right move? I had some approaches as the market started improving again to go back on to the other side of the fence and work as a structural engineer again. And I thought, oh, wow, that could be, wow, look at them. They can't, and that was the days as a site engineer, you had to wear a tie and it's like far out. It's crazy when you think about it.
Not the best.
No, not the best. Not the best. that only has come later. And any generation that comes in sees the life that the generation in front of them is having and wants to have that as soon as they can. With the advent of the age of technology, that's driven that even more so. With the advent of skill shortages and, you know, a lack of ultimate labour in the industry, that's driven that even further. So there's this view of coming in and going, oh wow, I can attain these positions earlier. That can be a good thing. The challenge and the counter to that is that have I explored all the opportunities that are there? Do I actually understand what the industry can hold? And have I got a good baseload of experience? Because
I do want to talk about that baseload of experience because, so a couple of things. How many years were you in the industry before you moved into
project management? So I was in the industry for 6.5 years with Balderstone and then another. So nine years before I became a project manager and working on some pretty serious, difficult and complex projects.
Because, you know, if you look through what I'm seeing, and like I said, you know, we have a lot of younger PMs coming through. And I think there's a couple of things that's happening with that. There is a talent shortage.
Yes.
So I think businesses are looking at, we need to upskill our people quicker. But it doesn't mean, you know, so there's a lot of PMs who probably haven't, well, you know, so they're 3 to 5 years out of university, working in jobs that perhaps have not a lot of margin on them. And, you know, and I'm actually, you know, a lot of time in my role now, Adrian, I'm speaking to a lot of people in their 30s who are feeling really burnt out, who've had to make different sacrifices like give up their football or their netball or whatever because they're having to work, you know, obviously longer hours. If we had the perfect world where there wasn't a talent shortage, what would you say would be what should a foundation be for someone who wants to be a project manager? Like what would be the right path that they should, you know?
Yes.
And I know that shouldn't be, because I know that people can aspire and, you know, I was quite a young manager, but if I look at, was I a good manager? No, I wasn't. And I wish if I had to change my career, I wish I invested more in my management skills before I took on managing a team of 14 people.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, really good question. I think it's across a number of fronts. So again, to be a project manager, and what is really fundamental is your ability to manage outcomes through others. So that point I'll come back to, but it's really, you know, you're as I mentioned before, you're steering the ship, So whether it's a large project or a smaller project, you're still ultimately responsible. So that means you're responsible for procuring trades. You're responsible for then ensuring that, you know, the contractors, trade contractors are delivering, meeting all the financial, cost, safety type obligations, etc. If your project's larger, you've got a larger team that you need to manage. So there's issue number one.
Yeah.
Do you have the skills to be able to get the best outcome from
especially
that?
in that tier one space, you could have 40 people on site.
Correct.
Yeah.
And so,
if not more.
And so you look at that and go, well, in order to, so as an industry, one of the things I think we've done is we've given away that title too easily. And so, and that's not to say, oh, you know, we need to punish young people till they reach a point where they've really earned it. No, it's about having a good foundation, going back to your question of good technical skills. So across, and there can be two pathways. So there can be more a site management pathway or more a contract administrative pathway. Both are important. Ultimately, to become a project manager, you need to understand both well. I was fortunate, and I'm really happy that I had the site management pathway, because there's, even now in my position, there's nothing that I generally don't understand or can't resolve or work their way through, because even as a CE, because the Adelaide market's not massive, there's still an expectation from our customers that if there's a major problem, I want access to Adrian and how can he actually help mitigate the challenge and fix it. So if you take that down to a project management level, that's the expectation. But if you've got poor performance in your team, you might have a site manager that's 15 years older than you. How are you going to manage that? What are the, you know, so, and then it's up to the businesses to put programs in place. But ultimately, going back to what I said before, is that responsibility starts with the individual. So what I say to younger people is ask that question of yourself to go, am I actually ready to lead?
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't know until you try, but what we've got to get around is, I just want to get there. I'm just going to do it versus, no, I'd really like to do it because I'm interested in leading people to get outcomes through others. I like working with customers through challenging projects, work as a team to achieve something that's really great.
And like you said, if they're, you know, if they've got a site manager that's, you know, let's say 15 years older, it's, you know, gone are the days where the PM calls rank.
Yeah.
You know, it's a collaborative approach. You need to be working with your site manager and showing that person also that level of respect, because they're also on the ground making things happen. So the success of the project is it's a package with them both working together. But you are right. I have had site managers go, oh, got this young PM and he's telling me this and this and this. He's got no idea what he's doing, and and it's like, oh God.
So you look at that scenario, and I'll sort of, I love analogies. So anybody who works with me gets sick of them. But it's, if you put it into a sporting context, it's a bit like saying to a footballer who's, you know, you were talking about your son before, playing under 18s or under 15s, and they're now suddenly going into an AFL club.
Yeah.
And they're telling somebody, you know, like Nat Fyfe or Paddy Cripps or
wasn't a good enough mark.
Dangerfield, this is what you need to do.
Yeah.
You know, and that's, if there's an equity, it's all that happens is that those footballers they'll go, oh, you did tell me. I know what I'm doing. In actual fact, you've got no idea. I'm just going to run. And that's when you get fragmented teams. It's when you have issues. And then as a PM, if you're young, that can then lead to burnout, because it creates a lot of stress to go, well, hey, actually, I'm responsible for this. I want the outcome, but how do I? You're just not equipped with the skills to manage those difficult situations. So that's where you either need to seek that management training external, do it. My advice is do it in collaboration with the business. And even ask the business why they don't, or should they not have a program. So one of our programs that I put in place early on was a program about people leadership. So it's taking the individuals. And is that
something external, or do you have someone like internally leading that for
you? So best result is if you've got a strong HR and learning group who can actually lead that. But it should be led in conjunction. Well, it ultimately needs to be led by an executive. So whether it's a GM, CEO or state manager, somebody of that nature, with the team. but then a bespoke program based on what's best for business and what's best for individuals, with a combination of internal and external trainers.
Yeah.
So our people leadership program is constantly evolving. We, to qualify, you've generally got to be in the business minimum of 3 years up to 8 years, depending on the roles that you're doing.
Yeah.
And it's at that point where, and those that have been in the industry for a long time will understand this. Younger people probably won't. But when there's a realisation, oh, okay, I understand how things work. I understand the expectations on me, whether that's as a CA or as a site manager, a design manager or estimator. What next? And what do I need to help me?
Yeah.
Because it's more now, I've got the technical capability in the area that I've chosen. How do I actually take everything forward?
Yeah, so and how to get the best out of your teams, because I think also, Adrian, management is changing. I think how people led and manage teams 10 years, 5 years ago to now, it's like you've got to constantly have a growth mindset and want to keep learning, because
and constant feedback. These feedback loops.
Yeah.
So, simple example for me, when I first started in Baldies in the early 90s, I was told if you get no feedback, that's brilliant. Like if you hear nothing, you're doing really well. And you go, okay.
Yeah.
When people are talking to you or they're saying, then you're in trouble. And, the industry was, fairly robust and aggressive.
Yeah.
There's still elements of that exist now, but not to the same extent.
No.
And the latest, bullying, harassment and sexual discrimination laws that have just come out, that zero tolerance on all these behaviours. It's going to be a fascinating time. Our industry is going to have to reshape, and it sort of is. I talk to people about when in those early years, and then when I moved into the role of site manager, it was hugely blokey, or very surprising. A female on site was a site secretary, which very few sites, even larger projects.
I remember those days. It was scary to go out on site.
It would have been, as a female, really scary. And the smell was of oil, welding, BO, and whatever else. Then a younger generation came in, and the next generation were a little bit different. So, and it's the little subtleties that you notice. But I used to talk to people about, you can walk around and smell aftershave. And there's guys that are training as triathletes and care more about their health and fitness. That's why they've chosen it versus years gone past where people left school earlier and went into trades as a career.
Throughout your career, you've predominantly worked in a Tier 1 environment. And then the last 2 years, you've been growing and leading a Tier 2 business. What advice will you give, to a graduate that's coming through versus, because a lot of them can't go, who do you want to work for? And it's always like, well, I want to be the Lend-Lease or the multiplex of the world. And I think sometimes it's unfortunate that some of the Tier 3s, the smaller businesses in South Australia, miss out on attracting good talent to their business. I believe that it is really based on the individual, because I think each environment can offer something different, and it goes back down to understanding yourself, understanding your strengths, and also understanding how your career can develop in different organisations. But you've worked just where you started. You started in Tier 1 and now you've gone into Tier 2. We're seeing a lot of movement from people wanting to work into Tier 1 because mega projects are happening in Adelaide. What's your advice? So, about should I go Tier 1? Should I go Tier 2? Should I do Tier 3?
Great question. I think my advice to people is get out there and give it a shot. As in, I'd stand back and again look at yourself and go, why did I choose this as a career? And you're in the early part of your career. So is it about big, exciting, technically challenging projects? Or is it about having greater ownership on something that's smaller, where potentially, if you work with the Lend-Leases of the world, the multiplexes, etc., there's large numbers of staff, less projects, but the projects that are there are much larger. So to work your way up to a position of project management, if that's your aspiration, or to be a senior design manager or a CA, contracts administrator, which can lead to contracts manager and commercial manager, fantastic roles, which we didn't touch on before, but it takes time and you need to earn your stripes, because there's a lot of people, big teams. So what makes you stand out to be given an opportunity to lead a project? On some of the smaller businesses, and we have an element of this too in some of the smaller projects that we do, is that we have people that like working in that space and don't aspire to work on, say, Adelaide Aquatics Centre as part of a bigger team because they love the industry, they want to lead projects, but they don't want to lead anything that's too big. They like doing refurbishment type works, working with a hand in glove with a customer who's there all the time, and they want to be responsible for the full kit. And so if that's what drives you, the tier 3, tier 2 market can actually be a better entry point. It's interesting for me. I probably, people hear me talk about, because people will say, oh, Adrian, you guys are, have moved into a tier 1 space or tier whatever. For me, it's all about what does a business do to meet the needs of its customers and by supporting its people. And so when I first, when Tim and James first said to me, look, would you be, Tim and James, Sarah that is, interested in coming in and running our commercial contracting business? Good name, sort of underperforming business. But for me, it was really interesting to dissect where it sat. And there were younger people coming into the business at the time. And part of the problem is that we're only attracting them on an as-need basis. But they are using Sarah as a step into the market, as to the industry, not as a place for a career, which sort of really frustrated me. We had to turn that around, so that's where, we put in place the grad programs, the cadet programs, site supervisor trainee programs, etc., to grow talent. But it's then about what are the right projects that you can have. So for me, it's always been about trying to create a mix where there's opportunities for, we've got to have a market that supports it, but we're quite a diverse business where you can work on, we deliver the school PPPs, Adelaide Aquatic. So if you want an experience of working on a large project, you can get that. At the same time, you can work on the medium to smaller projects. So what I'd say to younger people is, if at the end of the day you want to work on a multi-billion-dollar project, there's only so many places you can do that. And if your aspiration is, I want to get to Seattle, New York, Canada, or Europe, those the large tier 1 businesses are really the only ones that can provide that opportunity. If, on the other hand, you want to get in, build a good base load of experience, understand, get experience across different projects of different size and scope, etc., looking at the, in the classification of tier 2, tier 3 downwards can actually be a really good start. And if you start in those organisations and it's not the right fit, you can always move.
Yeah, you can always move up as well.
You can always move up.
So you're sort of saying, I completely agree with you. I think if you are going to consider moving into the tier 1 environment, you need to have a bit of patience.
Yes.
And if you are someone like now what we're seeing that you feel that you're going to be, a project manager in the next 3 to 5 years, it's not, it shouldn't really happen. It probably won't happen. Yeah. I've also seen, I feel that, some individuals who aren't as system orientated, who don't like as much structure in process, sometimes struggle in that tier 1 environment.
I think you've identified, that's actually a really, really great point. So in that tier 1 environment, and I define tier 1 as those organisations that could raise the securitisation to do a $2 billion job.
Yeah.
And it's the old sort of latent contract, the CPB, Multiplex, and Lend-Lease are really the only three. There's Acciona and a few others, but they generally don't work here under their own steam. It's really interesting. Those organisations, if you need to get from A to Z, there's 26 steps. Yeah. And if you miss one of those steps, good luck to you, because if there's a problem, you'll get chastised for missing that step. In order to play in that space, it's very, very process oriented and structured, because it needs to be. Yeah. The way I structure our business in comparison is that we have good systems and good processes, but it's like to get from A to Z, imagine 8 fields. And the first field is, you go through the first gate at A, and then to get to the next field, you've got to get through gate E. There's guidance to get there, but you've got some freedom as to how you navigate that path.
There's a little bit like you can be a bit more nimble.
You can be a bit more nimble, a bit more entrepreneurial. Yeah. Because we need that in our market in order to get success. Whereas if you reverse it in the tier 1, it's all about surety, absolute certainty on mega, you can't afford on a $3.5 billion hospital to have a little bit of entrepreneurship coming in to try and manage to get a better outcome, because if you have that on 3 or 4 fronts, bang, all of a sudden, job's a disaster. Yeah. Whereas as you come down, you almost need that flexibility and flex in the market to get a good outcome. And that's very empowering for people.
I think it's important because sometimes, I do ask the question and people are like, oh, that, where do you see yourself in 5 years' time?
Yeah.
What do you want to do in 5 years' time? They're like, I don't know. Like, I just want to get a job right now. But it's important because, you may go into the tier 1 environment. Tier 1s do pay more than some of the tier 2s and tier 3s. So you might go down that venture and then realize, shivers, this is actually not quite right for me. The difficult thing is then you're so used to a certain salary level. Reality is you might need to go backwards.
Correct.
In salary and even in role or responsibility. Just because you're a senior project engineer in a tier 1 doesn't automatically mean that you're a project manager in a tier 2 or a tier 3.
Correct.
So there are some adjustments that need to be had. So it is important when you're thinking about your career, and I just cannot say it enough, do think about where you want to see yourself in the next 5 years.
Yes.
And really focus on where you feel your strengths are and just really play into that space. I want to tap into your leadership journey. So you came onto Maltese. I want to know, when did you realise that you want, like I know we've spoken about, was there like I want to be a people leader? Like how did it happen?
I think for me it just happened over time.
Yeah.
It was interesting actually, because if I think back to when I was at uni and had a good group of friends across different engineering disciplines as well. And we had this discussion once and around, where do you want to be in 10 or 15 years' time, just joking around over a few drinks. And
retired on the beach.
Yeah, that's right. Once we got through all
won the lottery.
Yeah, once we got through all the usual stuff that you could imagine. It was interesting hearing people's different points of view. I always wanted to move into a management position. And I had a couple of mates saying, well, what are you doing engineering for?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I like the technical part, but I want to transition from that into... So I think as a background, for me, it was there was something in me that always wanted to do that. And I think that was about the thrill I get seeing people grow, achieve, and, that whole team achievement. And for me, our business is working perfectly when everybody coming to work on a particular day, the actions that they're doing, they can see it's making a positive change, not just to their life, to their project, but to the business as a whole.
Yeah.
Where everybody's feeling connected and just moving together with really strong momentum. So I think for me it was always sort of in the background subconsciously without it being consciously.
Yeah.
But I remember starting off as a site engineer and wanting to then make the next step. And I had a good project manager at the time who said, look, if you want to do that, go ahead, and we've got someone new starting, but I'm going to hold you responsible for everything they do. So if they make a mistake, that's on you.
Yeah.
And that's stuck with me ever since that day, not from the point of view of micromanaging, but how do you empower people to perform so that you have responsibility for their outcome? Because, as CEO, I'm responsible for the outcome of the business, which is there's so many people that fall into that. But how do you set up a framework that enables them to succeed? So that's always really interested me.
Did you invest in your own learning, like through, because you were a sort of regional director at Brookfield Multiplex? Did you, during that time, did they invest in any sort of leadership management courses? I don't know if you did your MBA, or was there anything that you did at that time?
It's really interesting. So there was some companies
organically learned on the job.
Yeah. Well, and I think and I don't say this is the best. I wouldn't say this is ultimately the recipe that young people should follow. But experiential learning is the best learning. There's no doubt about that with anything. If that can be supported by a framework of education, even better. I think for me, in the multiplex life in particular, I joined that organisation in 2000 when John Roberts, it was still, his private business, family-run business, very, very entrepreneurial, as in the excitement around what that business was doing and drive was just, I loved coming to work. Yeah. Even though I was working as a site manager in Adelaide, you felt part of something that could
bigger
that could be really inspiring and interesting. And that for me is what I've always tried to create since, because it's a really lovely, interesting, an exciting place to be. But and when I got the opportunity to be a regional director, to be able to sit in a room at times with a regional executive team across Victoria, South Australia, and there was a bit of work happening in Tasmania, but seeing the different dynamics, the different personalities, let alone when it came to a national directors catch up. And the thing that really shone to me is that the lack of capability at that level.
Yeah.
And there are some really exceptional people. There
Yeah.
are a lot of really, really average people. And to be able to see firsthand the way people dealt with issues, you know, how they overcome them, learn from them with some business framework that and learning that was in place was positive. And so, should I have done an MBA? Maybe. Has it held me back? No. Am I looking at doing some future at the age of 50 with my vest? Am I looking at doing some? It is cold.
Yeah. Star pupil.
Yeah. Am I looking at doing some further learning? Yeah, I think so. Particularly, I'm interested in learning around what is it and what can we do to improve to make the experience better for younger people, the next generation, because the next generation of leaders coming through at Sarah are generally 10 plus years younger than me. So what should I be doing now to help them
to build them up?
To build them up and help them succeed, because I can't be around forever, unfortunately. I like to think I can.
Yeah. So I know I'm never aging. This actually segments really nicely into a question I wanted to ask you about personal brand.
Yeah.
Because you may or may not know this, but you have a really good personal brand.
Thank you.
Yeah. And look, and you hear, and you know, it's what people think of you. If you say Adrian Esplin, you know, whether I'm speaking to an architect or a client-side project management firm, to government, you know, there's certain unique words they'll use to describe you in a really positive way, Adrian.
That's good to know.
Good to know.
Thank you.
You've grown, Sarah. So when you started at Sarah Constructions, how many people were there?
60.
60, and I think the Sarah Construction business, not Sarah Group, is over 200 now.
Yep.
Closest, I think, nearer to 250. But how important was it? Like this personal brand that I keep going on about, how important was it in the way you've actually been able to grow your business? Because, you know, you have been involved with Property Council and they said you are involved with the universities. And I also know that you look at how to develop your leadership team with their personal brand. Has it played a big part?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting.
Do you use the word personal brand?
No.
Yeah, I was like, oh God, Anna, get on with
No. But it's I completely agree with the context, and it is about person. And so I do use that word from time to time.
But I think it's a talent magnet. Like, you know, I think also, you know, if you look at businesses who are trying to attract good people to their business, and if they're not invested in their own personal brand and what they stand for as a leader, then I think they've got it wrong. Yeah,
completely agree. Really well said. So what I say to people is don't compromise your personal brand. You know, when you're faced with difficult decisions, as what needs to happen from time to time, be it you know, from a project point of view or a business point of view, because projects and businesses can change. Your personal brand doesn't. And if you find yourself in a position where your personal brand is being sacrificed, or you're feeling you have to sacrifice it because of the needs of an individual that might be a manager or what a business is saying, then what I say to people is that we all have a little voice within us.
Yeah.
Listen to it. Yeah. It's the best guide. So, and if it's saying some things to you that are saying this doesn't feel right, generally it isn't right. So you need to do something about it. And that is to raise it as a conversation first off, try and talk to some people, preferably a manager, around how you're feeling, what's going on. Good businesses should have good, you know, people and culture or HR groups that you can reach out to if there are some things that you're feeling that you're having to compromise. Or if you just know, try and instigate positive change. If that is rebutted by the organisation that you're with, try and ask again the questions, or get around. If you can't, then you've got to look at it and go, well, hang on a minute, am I willing to sacrifice what I stand for?
Yeah.
And so base fundamental is be a good person and treat people well. Like it's not, if you're having to brutalise people to get an outcome, you're doing things the wrong way. And there's now laws saying you can't.
Sarah Constructions, it's the little tagline, it's relationship.
Building great relationships.
Building great relationships, right? And I don't know if that tagline was there before you arrived or after. It was there. And if I look at you as an individual, that's what you are. Your values are about building great relationships. And I know from my perspective that I've always valued, look, I'm just the recruiter. But
you're more than just the recruiter.
But it's so nice that I always feel that I can call you, and grab you for a coffee, even though you're a CEO of a big organisation. And that's because you are focused on those those relationships and what everyone brings to you and to your business. And I think also I've seen that reflected in how Sarah Constructions recruit their people, you know, because it does stem from the top, but they need to reflect your values.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, that's when it starts to dilute your personal brand. And it makes it hard when you're growing, because it's so hard to
how do you keep that together
on that. And that's probably like another conversation altogether. But, you know, for you and being a leader, and now, you know, as I said, you wear a lot of responsibility in managing people and growing a business and making sure it's profitable and all the rest of it. During your, you know, let's say the last 10 years, what are some of the sacrifices that you've had to make to actually allow you to be in this type of role?
Yeah, really good point, Anna. And again, it goes back to that strong European background you could put there, of strong work ethic. There is a workload that you've got to trudge through, and so you can't lose focus whilst you're doing that. You've got to be positive. You've got to lead from the front, but you've actually got to get things done and get results. So I was faced with, in my multiplex tenure, you know, there was some great positivity around what was happening with BHP at the time. They were going to expand Roxby. At Multiplex, we had just delivered for BHP a full turnkey solution, so a full property solution for their new facility in new office in Brookfield Place in Perth. We were delivering their new facility in Melbourne. They were having discussions with us about what a new facility would be in Adelaide. As soon as that decision was made, as a national business, well, as an international business, but our national leader rang me the second that happened, saying, hey, look, you know, we've got to tip things on their head. We've got some serious issues in Victoria. We need you to pivot, and we need your help in a couple of areas. I could have turned around and said, thanks, but no thanks. I don't want to travel. Had 2 young children at that time, 3 and 5.
Oh gosh, really young.
Really young. 2 young girls, and who are lovely young adults now. But so the sacrifice I had to make was going to work in Melbourne while still living in Adelaide. And so for nearly 3 years,
and that's hard, because I know that your wife has also got a successful career of her own right.
Yeah,
as well.
absolutely. As an OT who's moved into running clinical trials in her own right. So, you know, it's challenging. It's really difficult, no doubt. You know, you guys find that too with what you yourself and your husband, what you're trying to manage as careers and life for your family. Yeah. And you know what, it was difficult, because I would take off on a Monday morning, Sunday nights not often, because there's nothing more depressing. But, you know, Monday mornings, I had some flexibility, so because there was still some things I was doing here in Adelaide. So at times I could come back on a Wednesday. But generally, my wife had said, well, you never know that until a week or two beforehand. So I've just got to assume that you're not here. But again, she was on board. It was hard because you're away, and those people listening to this that do FIFO completely understand. Whilst you're away, you evolve in your own little, you know, microcosm. And then when you connect back in, I've got an expectation, they have, and quite often they don't meet. And by the time you get aligned again, you're off. And it was tricky. It was, you know, and you face...
It's hard because you're managing that, like that, you know, resentment as well. I can, you know...
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean? It's like, right, you're back, you're doing lunches, you're doing drop-off. You know, So
but it's really interesting, isn't it? I look at it, correct. And, you know, I had this time when my daughter, I came home and my youngest daughter had... You know, she was 5 by this stage, and she'd drawn the family as my wife, her sister, herself, the dog and the 2 cats. I was missing. And so, and I didn't look at that and get upset.
Invisible daddy.
The invisible daddy. But that's how she saw life.
Oh.
This was this dude that came in and out.
I know.
And, you know, and we spoke about it, and you go, well, you know, and we had this view that it's all best about family. But, you know, I have this immense gratitude, again, going back to, if I look at what my parents went through, but particularly my grandparents, you know, immigrating to a new country. On the Italian side, my grandfather came out after World War II, fighting in World War II, being a POW, you know, fantastic joiner, cabinet maker, landing in Australia, not being able to speak a word of English, landing in a place called Adelaide, and starting off as a lumberjack in Kaipo Forest. And so, and then my grandmother and my mum didn't join him for 2.5 years. Couldn't phone, couldn't write, you know. So you look at what people have done in war and other bits and pieces, and you go, well, you know what? Sometimes you've just got to buckle down.
I know.
Have a bit of resilience, have a view on what the long term is, and work your way through it, provided you've got a goal in mind and you've got vision as to what you're trying to achieve. It is interesting
because I think back in the day, like I know my parents, or my dad especially, worked 2 jobs to get us ahead, and I know my in-laws, they work 2 jobs to get us ahead. And I think life is very different now. I know that my kids are sometimes like, oh, Mum, it's it's all about your work and exercise. I'm like, hang on a second. I'm going to remind them of that when we go on our trip next week to Europe.
This wasn't paid for by the government.
But I also remember, my firstborn, Ollie, he was at childcare 5 days a week.
Yeah.
And I did have mother guilt during that time. But I have to say, he's 50. He's all right. He is fine. He's more than all right.
He's probably doing really well.
He's actually really independent and does really well. And yet,
can he iron his own shirt?
He absolutely can iron his own shirt.
That's a success.
And whilst my little one, who's turning 10 this year, and he's probably had a lot more, I've always worked full time, but my mother-in-law was more involved with him and stuff like that. I feel like we have to do everything for him. So I don't know. I think it's hard during those times, but you kind of it's got to be worth it. And I think if you're going to make those sacrifices, Adrian, like you did, it's got to be because you love what you do.
You love what you do, and you've got a goal in mind, and you've got vision on the future. And it's really interesting that if you put together a plan that's not outrageous, that's well thought through, well considered, with an eye on the market, there can always be challenges.
Yeah.
But generally you get there.
Yeah.
So whereas if you sort of sit back, have a focus on purely yourself from the point of view of what's everybody doing for me and what's in it for me, which is driven by, social media and all these other outside influences, then, it's by chance if things do happen for you. Yeah. You're not taking positive action. So, it's if you sacrifices are worth it. If you've got goals in mind and you've got vision as to why you're doing what you're doing, absolutely.
Adrian, you've achieved so much already. I really love to know what the next 5 years looks like for you and for Sarah Constructions.
Yeah, no, that's very kind of you, Anna, and I certainly don't look at life very often in a rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Occasionally I do just grab key learnings and experiences about in moving forward, what can we do? I hate using that term, but as we look forward, what can we improve on? I think for the next 5 years for me is really about consolidation and what are the key foundations that I can put in place, less for myself, but more for really the next group of leaders coming through and the leaders that sit behind them, and getting some learning and understanding around, because it now starts moving a little bit away from experientially what I've learned, as in there's a really great body there, to what are some of the frameworks that potentially younger people will be looking for to empower them to be better, because that's how they've been raised and taught in a different way that I was.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be in a position for the next 5 years where I'm trying to dictate outcomes which I'm potentially not the best. There's a whole lot of learning and experience that certainly will set that up well, but there's some additional learning that I'm looking to do which will empower that and take that further forward. So I'm actually really looking forward to the next 5 years, particularly
the next challenge,
particularly as we've come out of a fairly challenging period in the industry. And, the future is more volatility than what there was in the past for all the reasons that we said before. So how do we set up for success and deal with that? Me personally, and for the next group of leaders to really focus on them in the business. And then as a business, how do we capitalise on that? And what do we look at doing that's a little bit different? So we started a modular business. What's the next phase of that? What's our next investment going to be? How do we broaden what we do as a business? Because we've been quite geographically constrained, and it's not to say that we're going to be moving all over the place, and we do work for key clients outside of South Australia. So looking at what opportunities exist there. So it's a nice organic growth that I'm really excited about. The future leaders in the business, the leaders that they're trying to inspire beneath, what are some of the learnings that we can put in place so that the skill shortages, labour shortages, etc., we're making a positive change on the industry, not just within Sarah Constructions.
Yeah, I think it's great. And into that as well, Adrian, the development programs that you have set up within the business, like you said, it's great for Sarah Constructions, but it's also great for the industry as a whole.
Absolutely.
And definitely would love to see some other builders also sort of invest in their training and development programs within their businesses.
Absolutely. And the key behind that is don't look to others to solve your problems. Start yourselves.
Yeah.
Start, whether a small business, big business, stand back, have good vision. What's the strat? Why are you doing it?
Yeah.
And invest and put the programs in place.
Invest. Yeah.
And you know what? That small investment, and as an industry, we always struggle to do that because it's a low margin industry and it's kind of, where do you put the few dollars that you're making into the right spots? If you invest in people, if you invest in training, always pays off.
And absolutely. And I think
I'm yet to see that go backwards ever.
Yeah. And as that transparency, I think if as a leadership team, you're communicating back to your teams around what you're trying to do and create, investing into the business, so that, internal invest, into their career development, they'll probably get longer retention across their people.
I think so.
So it's been amazing chatting to you.
No, I've loved it.
Adrian, I've got one more question to ask. If you have to give someone a piece of advice, so whether, first few years into their careers or just started out, can you sum it up? Can you give us a few words?
A few words?
Or maybe in 30 seconds.
Oh, okay. Yeah, absolutely. Don't be afraid to take risk, but good educated risk, and take control of your career. Take ownership. Everything starts with you.
Yeah,
that would be my summary. So
Adrian,
was that 7 seconds, 8 seconds?
Thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really do hope people enjoy listening to our podcast today.
Yeah, thank you very much. And you've been very kind, so I've really enjoyed it. We could have kept going for hours. Thank you.
Thank you.